This is the Jackson Neill Music Podcast. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Jackson Neill. This is Sunday, October 27th, 2019. First one of these I've done in a while. Today, I have Donna-Claire Chesman of DJBooth. She's been on here a couple times. Well, she just finished up her series Year of Mac. I'm bringing her on to discuss that. But before we jump into that, I want to remind everyone that this podcast is available on all of your favorite streaming platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube. Basically, wherever you like to listen to podcasts, this is there. So make sure to go rate and subscribe to the podcast there. This will be coming out every single Sunday from now on, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. So for the past year, Donna has been working on her series Year of Mac, which once a week for 52 weeks, starting last October 2018, she wrote a piece on the late rapper Mac Miller, whether it was going through and kind of dissecting some bars from his old songs, going through and exploring motifs on his old projects, or even just talking to people who knew him in his lifetime. It's been a really, really cool series on an artist who had, I think, a really, really big impact and whose career arc is just really, really cool to look at. Donna describes it as almost like as three acts, and she just goes in detail and describes exactly how those acts play out. So with that series now wrapping up, I wanted to get Donna's final thoughts on it. I mean, I've had her on a couple times before to discuss the series. It's something I enjoyed reading every single week. Now that it's over, I'm pretty disappointed, but just so glad that we got these awesome 52 pieces from her. So I wanted to bring her on, get her final thoughts on it, get some of her final favorite stories that she heard throughout writing this series, and just see how the Year of Mac really went. So let's jump right into that conversation. Summarize this past year writing this series, just how would you do that?
I would describe it as arduous, but in a good way. So it was a lot of work, obviously, to produce 52 pieces at the quality that I think I produced them at. But it was all a labor of love. I never felt like I had to squeeze to get the words out. It all felt very natural. The interviews felt natural. Coming up with the ideas felt very natural. These were just things that came to me. But while I was in the thick of it, it really felt like it was never going to end. Like, I didn't think that I would ever be able to step away from the work and just look at it and appraise it. And though people were reaching out to me and telling me that the pieces meant a lot to them and that the series meant a lot to them, I didn't really understand the impact I was having, because I would see the emails, I would reply with a thank you, and then I would just go back to working. So now that I'm not working, I'm really kind of amazed. Like, I can't believe I did that. That's pretty crazy. And it's just kind of fuel for whatever my next big project is going to be.
Yeah, exactly. Once you get that time to kind of step back and take a look at it, it's like, whoa, I did this. I really accomplished it. Now you have that time to be able to look back on it.
Yeah, and I always, when I interview artists, I like to ask them sometimes if they've taken a moment to appreciate what they've done. And it's always the same answer. It's always, no. And so now I have this moment. This is the first Wednesday where there isn't a Year of Mac. And that's really weird. Mm-hmm. But it's also really cool because it means that I've done my job. And I think I did a good job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd have to say you did a good job. And I was thinking that this morning when I was going back and looking through some of them to prepare for this, I was thinking, man, it just feels so weird to not have that DJBooth tweet come up and say, hey, there's a new Year of Mac posted. So I can speak for a lot of people when I say we're already missing it 1 week into it. I kind of want to go back to just the start of it. What were your initial thoughts going into this series? I mean, it was a pretty tall task to write about one artist for an entire year.
Really, I just wanted to write. I felt possessed in a way. There was an electricity in me, and I just wanted to make something special. And I remember the editorial call I took with Z and then the then managing editor, Brendan, and I was like, I'm going to write about Mac. And they said, okay, how about a month? I was like, no, a year. And they said no, and I said yes, and I told them to just trust me. And they took a risk, because when you promise something, you have to follow through, especially on the internet. How would it look if week 13 came around? I was like, okay, guys, Year of Mac's over, can't do it anymore, out of ideas. So they took a big risk. trusting me, but I just knew I could do it. And I didn't have in mind like a goal or an agenda where I wanted each piece to kind of forward my opinion of Mac in any way. I just kind of wanted to take his artistry and dissect it in these creative ways. And I wanted to just show every side of who he was as a creative. I think that was so important to me, was that as I went through this year and I grieved and I felt better, I started understanding his music differently. And so I think the most interesting part about the pieces is when you look at the beginning, the endings are all really solemn, and you look towards the middle and the ends, and my conclusions are always a lot more hopeful. And so I guess if I had to step back now, my agenda would be that there's hope in his catalog. And I really, really like to think that I helped bring that to light.
Yeah, I was about to ask, I mean, doing this series for this long 52 pieces, you really obviously dove really deeply into Mac Miller's catalog. I guess how would you say your perspective, like you said, you realize there's hope in there, but how would some other ways maybe your perspective on his music change throughout the writing of this?
I think through the interviews especially, I came away with the impression that he was just the pinnacle of joy. He was always happy, he was always generous, he was always in a giving mood. And everyone that I've spoken with on and off the record has said even in his like darkest moments, there was light in him. And I think that's true of his discography, is even in the darkest moments, there's a light there. Like to make a record like Faces, you can't be in the throes of that feeling because you'll never get the emotional distance required to make something impactful. So to know that he did make Faces and that he got through that moment, there's light in that. So even when he raps, "I'm the only suicidal motherfucker with a smile on," there's light in that because he's past that point. And so I think that there's just this uncanny goodness to him and his music that revealed itself to me as I was dissecting it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's an interesting perspective, the idea that, because sometimes you hear artists make a record like Faces or like maybe a more dark album and you think that they're really going through it, but you're right, they kind of have to get out of that in order to make that record because it's a pretty dark one, and you can imagine if you're having those thoughts, you wouldn't be able to exactly express them very well or work on an album to that degree.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you can really tell when someone's made something before they finish processing it versus when they've gotten through the emotion and they've gotten some perspective on it. And I think that's something that he did so well in his catalog, was there was always so much perspective to his dark moments. It wasn't just "I'm sad, rah rah." It was always like, "I'm hurting and this is why, and these are the moments that hurt me, and I can tell you this because I don't feel these moments anymore." I think that's really special.
Yeah, there was always that kind of perspective, and almost I've seen it described as like this wisdom within his music about how, like you said, you could look back on those moments and really analyze them rather than just say I was sad, but pick it apart and say maybe this is why I was sad. These are the reasons. Maybe there's a way to prevent that in the future. Maybe there isn't, but I'm just going to keep on moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, take a look at a song like "Perfect Circle, Godspeed." Like that is a horrifically cutting record. He's talking about how he doesn't want anyone to ever have to tell his mother he OD'd. And to write from that dark place, that had to be a real fear for him. But it's also the album where he like took the reins back on his life in a way that he didn't in 2014 with Faces. So you just have to consider the fact that he is always moving forward. He's kind of like a shark.
Yeah, there you go. And I like you mentioned that track, because a question I have is, looking back through his catalog, doing this, were there some tracks that maybe beforehand you hadn't really appreciated that you gained a newfound appreciation for, and like if so, why?
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite track off of Faces for a long time was "Here We Go," and it's my second favorite Mac Miller song. But I really, when I was writing the Faces piece, fell in love with "Malibu." I think that there are so many great lines on there that are just mind-blowing, just in their simplicity. Like the one line, "Kill me now if I did it all for hip-hop." Like there's so many layers to that sentiment. And then, of course, the line that I quoted earlier, "I'm the only suicidal motherfucker with a smile on," that is just the layers in that and the way that it strikes a chord of feeling and just talks this collective unconscious of depression, it's really so impactful in a way that I would struggle to articulate. But it's just moving stuff, man.
I'd agree. I mean, there's so many quotes from him. Whenever I listen to Mac, I always think of those specific lines that they make sense, but they also don't really. They don't really make sense. Like that line on the line on the course of self-care where it's about, hitchhiking and, kind of through the night. And it's like, I've never hitchhiked through the night or anything, but man, that touches me for some reason. The way he said it, that touches me. I feel like there's a lot of lines throughout Mac Miller's discography that are like that.
Yeah, I think that he was transcendent in that way, where his writing very much so like tickled a nerve that we didn't know we had exposed. And that is what makes him so important to so many people. And it's been that way throughout his entire discography. Like even with kids, he was like massaging a knot out of our backs in a way with just fun, happy music. And he was speaking to this like blithe youth that everyone kind of experiences, or if they don't experience it, the iconography of America tells them what it looks like, and you can relate to it in that way. So from kids to swimming, he's always been able to hit on that thing that we didn't know we needed.
Mm-hmm. And it's crazy, like you mentioned kids, because it's like that's a record that's so much, like you said, with that youthful energy. And when you look at how he progresses throughout his career, he seems to strike that nerve through the kind of ages. A lot of times artists maybe can, have a similar, they can strike that nerve for a certain age group, but it's a struggle for them to progress. Whereas Mac Miller, it never seemed like it was a struggle for him to progress. There was always different phases and different ways for him to go.
Yeah, like I always say, his career was a perfect 3-act play, and I think it's really special that he grew up with his audience, and the first time his audience was falling in love, or maybe, the second or third time, but like just that real love he captured in 2016. And when his audience was like reaching more than young adulthood, not exactly adulthood, he got that life music with Good AM. And when you are in the throes of trying to figure out how it is you survive in this world, he gave us Swimming. So I think that his music just has this divine timing to it. And it also speaks to his willingness to change and grow. Because it would be really easy for him to make the same thing over and over again, or it'd be really easy for him to make the safe play. Mm-hmm. But he always chose to push himself. And I think that in pushing himself, he opened himself up to growing with his audience. And the people that took that ride with him, they were rewarded with beautiful music.
Mm-hmm, definitely. I love, I've heard you mention that three-part play for his career. Can you just tell me what parts do you think, at what points in his career do you think the parts change? I kind of forget.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that it starts formally with Kids, and it goes until Macadelic, and Macadelic is the start of his second creative act, and that goes all the way until Good AM. And then after Good AM, it changes with The Divine Feminine and Swimming.
Mm-hmm. Why do you pick those as the points where it changes?
Well, I think that on Macadelic, he took a left. And when I spoke with Benji Grinberg, he told me the same thing. So I think he took a left creatively. He got more introspective. It was less about the quote-unquote frat rap. It was less about youth and more about, like, struggle. It was still fun, still lively music, but there was this tinge to it, and you could tell that something was happening. And then going into Watching Movies, which is, like, a darker record, it's just more like lyrically dense and creative in a way that he was not mature enough to make a Watching Movies at the time that he made Kids. And then you go all the way up to Good AM, which is just like this beautiful life music. And then he gets so much more musical with it on The Divine Feminine. And that shift, I think, of him leaning into the musicality, leaning into his singing voice, and kind of like shedding fears about having to make the traditional rap record. I think that shift from Good AM to The Divine Feminine is so marked because he already made the solid rap record. He did it with Good AM. That's just the epitome of a strong body of hip hop work, right? In the contemporary era, one of the epitomes. And he didn't have that pressure on him anymore, so he could make what he liked. And we hear that musicality come even further on Swimming, which is beautifully arranged, and he's playing all over it. And he's really leaning into the fact that he is just truly a musician's musician. And that harkens all the way back to when he met Edan and he met Germ, and these people who were in his formative years, they all noted that he could pick up any instrument. He could really lean into the musicality of it. It was just when he chose to show that side of himself. And I think that comes at the end because he did make good AM.
Yeah, I think I was reading, rereading that piece with his publicist Nick Dearl, and Nick mentions how Max, he made that, like you said, made that rap record with Good AM, and it almost freed him to make the more instrumentally interesting and diverse projects like Divine Feminine and like Swimming.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so throughout this, you mentioned you spoke to a lot of different people. There was just a wide array of interviews throughout this series of people that were close with Mac. I guess, what were some common themes you touched on or you noticed in each of these interviews about Mac Miller?
Definitely his generosity. I think everyone had a story about a time where Mac just gave to them with no expectation of getting anything in return. Whether it was his dinners or it was helping Germ when he was in the hospital with his medical bills, Mac was always ready to assist someone. It made him feel good, I think, to be able to be like an angel in someone's life.
Mm-hmm. What were some? I guess what were there's a ton of stories throughout this. I guess what was a story maybe that kind of caught you off guard or maybe took you by surprise that you heard about him?
Definitely when Germ told me that he had gotten shot, at that Mac covered almost all of his medical expenses, and then he was the first person to visit him in the hospital with Ariana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a pretty touching moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just speaks to the fact that he was an artist and he was famous and he was all these things that we love him for, but he was also a human being, and he had a family that he cared for. And he wanted to show up for those people, no matter where he was in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you mentioned in one of the interviews, they mentioned how once Mac decided a person was in his inner circle, it was ride or die. It was that they are now part of this family for him, and he would continually check up on them. I mean, the one with Craig Jenkins, where Craig Jenkins mentions how Mac was continually touching base with them, and Craig was even losing touch with people that he lived close to, and yet Matt, here's this guy who must have 1 million people in his life, but still keeping close with them. I mean, I just looked at that and marveled at you're right, the generosity with, in that case, his time and his energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if there was one word for him, it would just be generous. I think that's the one way. I always ask the interviews, how do you want Mac to be remembered? But if you asked me, I think I just want people to remember him as a generous soul.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good way. And I want to transition now and talk about that last piece, because in the last piece, you talk about So It Goes, Mac's final song on Swimming, and what would end up becoming basically his final song. I guess what is it about So It Goes that makes it such a meaningful final track?
I think it's just the way that it ends. He ascends into heaven in this way. There's a wall of sound that just envelops you. It's just very conclusive and very impactful in a way that's hard to articulate, because it's just it's a lot of feelings at once. It's peaceful, it's conclusive, it's overwhelming, it's like reaching the top of a mountain and taking in how small you are in comparison to everything around you, and then just letting that feeling blanket you. And that's what So It Goes final moments sound like. Mm-hmm. So I think that it just made the most sense for me to end at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So your series has wrapped up, and even though there's 52 pieces, was there any topics or anything you didn't get a chance to cover that maybe you wanted to?
I wanted to write a lot more Faces pieces, but as I was getting to the halfway mark of working on them, because I scheduled them so far in advance, it occurred to me that if I take up more time with what I want to do, I'll have less interview opportunities. And so if you notice, the final couple pieces were all interviews in a row, and so that was by design. So I ended up putting a couple of Faces pieces just got rid of them because I wanted there to be room for the people close to Mac to have their moment and to talk about him, because that is more important to me than bringing you another lyrical analysis that I could always do later if I had to.
Yeah, exactly. But the interviews are something that you really wanted to catch in this first year after his passing, really catch those opinions of the people who really knew him best.
Yeah, it was just more important to me to give a platform to the people in his life than it was to show off my ability to like dissect Bar.
Mm-hmm. Well, the pieces where you did dissect bars, I will say those were very, very good as well. So,
thank you. I appreciate that.
So now I guess just my final question would be: the series is over. It's been a year. Just what are your final thoughts on it, looking back? I mean, you said now that you were able to almost take a second to really appreciate it, but I guess now moving forward, just what are your thoughts on it?
I'm proud. I'm really proud. I'm proud of what I did. I'm proud that I did it. I'm happy that I pushed myself to do it. I'm happy that I proved my editors wrong when they said maybe it should just be Month of Mac. And I said, no, it has to be a year. And I'm proud of the relationship that I've built with his music. I think that I have discovered so much in his work that I wouldn't have discovered if I didn't endeavor to. And that's not through any fault of his, because I think it's all there in the work for us to uncover. But to really put your head down and go for it for a year, you build such a rapport with the artist's work, and I think that's really special. So pride, I guess. Pride, and I would say a big sigh of relief, because it was a lot.
Yeah, it certainly was. I mean, I think those are good things to feel. It was a really, really great series, one that I enjoyed checking in with every week, and one that I still find myself, going back to some articles where I read them last year, but I want to reread them and just experience seeing that article. So I just want to say congratulations to you, because it was a damn good series.
That means a lot to me. That's what I'm doing now, is I'm going back and I'm just like making mental notes of people who have reached out to me, and I have a little folder in my inbox of these emails because I like to save things for a rainy day. And I've like gone back and I've read some of those, and I still get notifications on Twitter for people that are just discovering the series, and like I get nice mentions and things like that. And I'm just taking the time now to really appreciate the fact that I did touch people, because that's what it's all for. It's all for him, but it's also for the greater community.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And if there's one thing, I when I saw that you ranked your top 5 Mac songs, and I saw Here We Go at number 2, I was so happy to see that. That's one of those tracks where I feel like I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it, and I love. So when I saw you had that in your top 5, I was very happy.
That makes me happy.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you taking these couple of times to talk about this series. As a huge Mac fan, it was awesome reading it and awesome having you on, so thank you.
Thank you, my friend. It's always a pleasure to talk.
Again, just a huge, huge thank you to Donna for coming back onto the podcast. Remember, just go down into the description of this podcast on any platform you're listening to. There, I'll have a link so you can follow Donna on Twitter so you can keep up to date on all the new pieces she's writing, but I'll also have the link to the archive of all of the Year of Mac pieces, because even though it's over, it's still really, really great to go back and reread some pieces if you've already seen them before, or catch up and read the pieces that you might have missed out on. And with that, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Jackson Neill Music Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, make sure to subscribe and rate this podcast on your favorite platforms. I have new episodes coming out every single Sunday from now on. For more episodes, go down into the show notes and visit the link to jacksonneillpodcast.com. There you'll find more episodes of this, the archived episodes, as well as my sports and interview series, Anything Goes with Jackson Neill. Those are all on jacksonneillpodcast.com. If you're a really big fan of the show, I know some of you guys are, maybe consider becoming a subscriber over on Patreon. There, for just a couple dollars a month or even $1 a month, you can get access to cool bonus content from this podcast right here, as well as my sports and interviews. Sometimes those bonus questions I ask in the interviews are even better than the actual interviews themselves. You know, I write, record, produce, do everything for these podcasts myself as a full-time college student, so any little bit of support just helps me spend more time making these cool episodes. Link to Patreon down in the show notes. If you want to stay up to date on everything I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at JacksonNeill20. Today's show music is by Analog by Nature with their song CDK Sunday. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you all next time.